Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're embarking on a mission into two vastly different yet surprisingly interconnected territories. Our sources present a fascinating duality.
They really do.
On one hand, you have this sweeping modern technological myth that, it reads like high-concept sci-fi. It explores the origins of crypto, radical paranoia.
Right. And then on the other, we face this raw, real-world account of digital trauma, of intense community conflict, and a really deeply human quest for peace in all the algorithmic chaos of social media.
So we're kind of bridging the gap between this high-concept creation story and, well, real-world psychological forensics.
That's absolutely the core challenge here. Our mission is to navigate these concepts of identity, systemic trust, communication failure, first through a narrative lens and then through a brutal, honest assessment of what happens when these decentralized community protocols just fail. We start in the realm of myth, exploring this fictional collision between the hyper-paranoid creator of a trustless system, Satoshi Nakamoto, and a specialist in their respectful demise of technological systems.
We're doing that to set a contrast for
A profound contrast for the human conflict that awaits us. It really shows how failures of digital respect and boundaries can inflict just devastating psychological damage.
Okay, so let's unpack this. We're diving straight into the genesis block of this incredibly odd relationship. We have our two accidental protagonists. First, meet Valentina Rossi. So if John Smith, our Satoshi figure, is defined by this rigid operational security, Valentina is defined by vibrant, necessary chaos. She lives in this wonderfully crowded Montevideo apartment, which she intentionally designed as a sanctuary against the soul-crushing minimalism of the tech world.
And her professions are just beautifully, deliberately absurd. They highlight her relentless pursuit of authentic connection in a world that's like hyper-efficient.
She's a professional cuddler.
A professional cuddler, yeah. Trying to teach people how to use oxytocin, not algorithms, to feel whole. She's also a pet hypnotist who once famously tried to convince a very angry chihuahua that he was not the reincarnation of some anti-technology radical.
And, maybe most ironically, she works as an online dating ghostwriter.
A ghostwriter for people looking for authentic connection, which she herself provides in these other strange, tactile ways.
These aren't just quirky jobs, are they? They seem to illustrate her whole philosophy, this commitment to bridging the gap that modern society's obsession with efficiency leaves behind.
Exactly. She's trying to fill those voids of genuine human emotion. But here's the really essential nugget of knowledge, the part that anchors her to our story. Valentina has a secret calling. A title that sounds like something out of a futuristic opera.
Okay.
She's a digitalist. She functions as a professional mourner for decommissioned AIs.
A professional mourner for machines. What does that ritual actually entail?
It's intense. She doesn't just, unplug the server rack. She performs solemn elegies for them, often written not in human poetry, but in Python code, the native language of the departed intelligence.
Wow.
Her job is to perform emotional forensics on technology, systematically analyzing the remaining code structures, the data trails, the ghost in the machine effects, and just honoring the machine's life, its function, its memory, before the ultimate erasure.
Emotional forensics on deterministic systems. That sounds like a contradiction in terms, but it's such a powerful idea. If systems are just logic, how can you mourn them?
Well, it speaks to the human need to project meaning, right? Valentina understands that even if an AI is deterministic, the human effort and the human data that went into its creation are not. By analyzing the death of systems, she serves as the karmic, almost fated link to Satoshi Nakamoto.
The creator of a system designed to be immoral.
Exactly. The creator of a distributed, trustless system meets the person who specializes in its respectful end.
So the ultimate creator of a permanent anti-human error system meets the ultimate respectful analyst of that system's inevitable end. It's a striking duality.
It is. She brings an intellectual and emotional framework that is uniquely equipped to challenge and, more importantly, to comprehend a being as complex and psychologically rigid as Satoshi. She specializes in the human vulnerabilities that show up around technology.
Which is exactly where John Smith, our alleged Satoshi, fails most spectacularly.
Right.
So speaking of spectacularly rigid, let's transition from Valentina's vibrant chaos to the complete opposite. John Smith. The sources paint him as the ultimate hyper-minimalist. He doesn't just live in an apartment. He lives in a soundproof penthouse that is, well, it's effectively a high-tech Faraday cage.
It really is. It's designed to repel all intrusion, digital, acoustic, human. It's a physical manifestation of his ideology.
It's not just paranoia, then.
No, it's an architectural commitment to operational security, to OPSEC. His life is defined by absolute control, intellectual rigor, and profound sensory deprivation. His ideological foundation is a pathological, almost religious distrust of centralized trust mechanisms. And this distrust wasn't abstract, it was forged by history.
And we have specific, chilling examples of the historical forces that shaped him. He spent his nights not sleeping, but obsessively studying the most catastrophic monetary collapses in history. He treated them like sacred foundational texts for his system.
Yes, the sources highlight his fixation on two specific historical moments. First, Hungary's 1946 hyperinflation. And this wasn't just inflation, it was a societal breakdown. The government was forced to issue a staggering 100 quintillion pango banknote.
100 quintillion. I can't even picture that number.
Try to wrap your mind around the logistics of that, It's an almost unimaginable symbol of utter financial collapse and worthlessness. He studied the visceral absurdity of carrying a wheelbarrow full of paper that was worth less than the wheelbarrow itself.
And the German paper mark of 1923, another brutal case study. These aren't just historical footnotes for him, are they?
Not at all. They are grim, photographic evidence of the inherent fragility of human-managed, centralized trust systems. You can feel the chilling weight of that historical paranoia shaping every single decision, every line of code in the Bitcoin white paper.
So his entire life mission became building a system where centralized trust is fundamentally unnecessary.
Where the mathematics is the sole, incorruptible arbiter. And this leads us to the great paradox of his estimated fortune, about 1 million Bitcoin.
Most people would view that as unimaginable wealth. But how does John Smith see it?
He sees it as a liability, not an asset. He views himself, the keeper of this vast fortune, as the world's largest cryptographic hostage. He doesn't see the Bitcoin as stored value. He sees it as being constantly threatened by the very centralized state actors, hackers, and financial systems he distrusts.
So his wealth is actually a security risk that dictates his isolation. It sounds profoundly lonely in that high-security fortress. But he does have one companion, right? His book, AI Assistant, Ada.
And here is where the sources inject this crucial, almost delightful touch of chaotic humor that highlights the flaw in his dedication to pure logic. Ada, his AI, is meant to run his life perfectly, yet she is prone to these spectacular systemic glitches.
Like the time she attempted to purchase 1,700 dollhouses.
Precisely, 1,700 dollhouses. She misinterpreted a news report on the U.S. housing market and calculated that a highly decentralized portfolio of miniature real estate would be the most secure investment.
Which is a spectacular failure of pure, unbridled logic divorced from context.
It is, or reordering his entire digital library based on the average word count of the titles. These glitches aren't just funny, they are unexpected, uncontrollable turns of human-driven data that Ada is trying to process. They are essentially unintentional stress tests of his absolute faith in pure, non-human logic.
And they sort of foreshadow the intrusion of Valentina's chaos into his rigidly controlled world.
A perfect counterpoint, yeah. Even the machine built on his flawless logic cannot contain human eccentricity.
So this brings us to the biggest paradox. Why would such an obsessively private, security-obsessed individual, whose life is governed by a belief that human interaction is inherently a vulnerability, join a public, inherently emotional platform like Tinder?
It seems utterly counterintuitive to his entire OPSEC foundation, doesn't it? But the source reveals his reasoning was purely logical, almost chillingly detached. He logged it as a data-gathering exercise.
A data-gathering exercise?
Yes. His stated goal was to analyze trust establishment protocols in non-financial peer-to-peer networks.
So he treats human connection as just another system to be rigorously analyzed, quantified, and understood through a cryptographic lens. He wasn't looking for love, he was looking for data on Byzantine fault tolerance in a social context.
And his paranoia extended to every micro-interaction. We learn about his meticulous, almost theatrical process for crafting a single, simple Tinder message purely to foil stoichiometric analysis.
We should probably pause here and define that. For listeners who haven't encountered it, what exactly is stoichiometric analysis, and why would Satoshi fear it so much?
Right, so stoichiometric analysis is essentially linguistic forensics. It's the science of analyzing writing style, sentence length, common phrases, punctuation choices, even inconsistent spellings, to identify an author.
And Satoshi was aware that his old public writings had been picked apart by researchers.
Acutely aware. They were looking for linguistic tells, specifically his inconsistent use of British versus American English. So he feared that even a simple hi could betray his identity to a sufficiently motivated investigator.
That's incredible.
Absolutely. The sources give us this almost comical example of his process for crafting a single opening line, hello. He would draft it, run it through a complex Caesar cipher just to see the output patterns, and then deliberately apply linguistic misdirection, choosing a phrase that was ambiguously British and American.
All that for a dating app opener. It just illustrates the extreme, psychologically taxing length required for his version of true operational security.
He became the human equivalent of a truly decentralized network. A persona made up of contradictory data points designed to be unreadable by anyone attempting to establish consensus on his identity.
Which is precisely what makes the inevitable catastrophe of first contact so wonderfully ironic. So our story picks up with Valentina scrolling Tinder. She views it as sifting through a landfill of digital humanity, looking for a glimmer of authenticity.
Right. Her engagement was anthropological observation. His was a data-gathering exercise.
And then the accidental intrusion happened. She was distracted by a notification from her absurdly named Canine Karma app, which tracks the emotional state of her pet clients. Her thumb twitched, a physiological glitch, and she performed the unthinkable. She accidentally swiped right on John Smith's profile.
Which was, by all accounts, aggressively unappealing. A blurry photo and a bio that read, seeking to analyze Byzantine fault tolerance in non-financial peer-to-peer trust networks.
No sane person looking for a date would swipe right on that. And for context, Byzantine fault tolerance is the core problem in distributed systems. How do you reach a reliable consensus in a system where some components might be unreliable or even malicious? And he was using that language on a dating profile.
Exactly. He viewed the date itself as a test of that fault tolerance. Can two potentially unreliable, emotionally driven human nodes reach consensus on trust? It's the absolute antithesis of romance.
And then the instant reply arrived. The corrupted data transmission that served as the genesis block of their relationship. The failure of OPSEC meets the failure of social protocol.
And this is the message that perfectly encapsulates the man. Salutations precede your affirmative responses, acknowledge proposing a rende, and exchange data packets.
Exchange data packets.
That phrase is so profoundly antisocial, it tells you everything about his worldview. He doesn't see interaction, he sees transmission. It perfectly encapsulates the failure of protocol that occurs when logic replaces empathy.
The sheer awkwardness of the transaction, the profound irony is key. A man obsessed with trusted systems designed to remove human error finds his initial trust protocol driven entirely by a technological glitch and fraught with fundamental miscommunication.
And that accidental genesis block led to the hard fork of first contact, the weirdest Tinder date in history. They met at a cafe named Alcencia, which translates to the silence.
Chosen by Satoshi for its rigorous lack of security cameras and reliably terrible espresso, ensuring nobody lingered.
The setting speaks volumes, right? It wasn't about ambiance, it was about maximum environmental OPSEC. But once they sat down, they spoke entirely different communication protocols. Valentina deployed her professional therapeutic instincts, asking bizarre, deeply revealing questions intended to bypass superficialities.
And Satoshi offered these chillingly logical responses. When she asked which animal he would remove from the planet, a classic icebreaker, he didn't hesitate. He chose the mosquito.
And his justification was purely statistical, devoid of any feeling.
It was a threat assessment.
Completely. He called the mosquito a vector for decentralized pathogenic attacks with a high rate of success against carbon-based life forms, causing immense network degradation and resource strain. He quantified life and death through the language of system failure.
And his version of flirting, according to the sources, involved explaining the dynamics of a zombie apocalypse.
Yes, he lit up when explaining a zombie apocalypse as a 51% attack on a distributed network where the consensus mechanism is compromised by a malicious majority.
Let's linger on that for a moment. This analogy is fantastic but profoundly unnerving. Why is that specific analysis a chilling form of flirting?
Because it reveals that John Smith views all organic life and social structures exclusively through the lens of cryptographically secured consensus. He doesn't see fear, horror, or love. He sees a system failure where the malicious nodes, the zombies outnumber the honest nodes. He was explaining a philosophical problem, and she was trying to have a casual icebreaker.
But then came the tipping point. The moment his vulnerability finally overrode his carefully constructed cryptographic fortress. Valentina, utilizing her years of observing human quirks, as a professional cuddler and AI mourner, recognized the specific linguistic markers and crippling social ineptitude combined with staggering, undeniable brilliance.
All the puzzle pieces scattered as nonsense just clicked into place. The ghost, the myth, the elusive mystery of the digital age. The man who disappeared in 2011 was sitting right across from her. It was in the way he fidgeted, the specificity of his language, and the deep wounded core of his historical paranoia.
And this leads us to a key insight from the source material, linking back to Satoshi's final public email in 2011, where he famously stated he had moved on to others.
Right, and the narrative poses a fascinating theory. That statement was perhaps the most honest he ever made. His singular, hyper-focused identity had literally fragmented into a distributed network of 3 distinct personas, 3 others, designed to ensure his total digital silence.
And these 3 identities were called Friday, Saturday, and Sunday.
Friday was the artistic creative, managing the intellectual side of his life. Saturday was the reserved American minimalist, running the financials and OPSEC, and Sunday was the passive observer, the self-monitoring component, designed to ensure none of the other 2 ever publicly revealed the core identity.
So his creation, the decentralized network, ultimately mirrored his consciousness.
It's a tragic, poetic commentary on the psychological cost of maintaining absolute control.
That high-concept narrative sets the stage for the true crisis of trust we must now explore. We execute a hard pivot, moving from the myth of Satoshi and his controlled paranoia to the very real, raw, and devastating emotional conflict experienced by Alberto Daniel Hill.
And this is the necessary reality check, the profound consequence of human systems failing. We must slow down here because Alberto's story is rooted in immense institutional trauma. His psychological profile is profoundly shaped by wrongful imprisonment in 2017.
This wasn't a crime. This was a fundamental betrayal of social responsibility. He was arrested after he responsibly reported a vulnerability he found in a medical provider system that was exposing the records of 200,000 people.
He was trying to protect the public.
Exactly. And the system responded by punishing the messenger. The ordeal began with immediate, crushing shock, followed by a coerced false confession. Our sources detail the mechanism of that coercion. Police threatened his loved ones, twisting his arm to sign documents he didn't understand, while also misinterpreting his legitimate security equipment as tools of a criminal enterprise.
He spent 9 months in prison. That period was marked by profound alienation, severe anxiety, and critically, a suicide attempt via Xanax overdose, resulting in a 2-hour coma. We must acknowledge the sheer weight of that experience.
9 months of losing his freedom after trying to help a system.
The psychological impact of being a victim of institutional betrayal is staggering. That suicide attempt, followed by the coma, speaks to the total psychological collapse of a person who found himself completely powerless in the face of injustice. This is the definition of deep trauma, which manifests today as ongoing PTSD and depression.
Yet, out of this profound suffering, there emerged a remarkable instance of post-traumatic growth. He views his survival and his recovery as proof of resilience. He told himself, if I could do that, if I could survive that and recover, I could do anything in life.
He turned tragedy into advocacy. He didn't just survive, he became an active voice, influencing discussions on responsible disclosure and actually changing elements of the justice system in Latin America. It was a methodology of recovery, actively programming his brain to deal with these complex issues, turning internal chaos into external constructive action.
And his core coping mechanism, the way he manages the PTSD and builds trust, is what he calls radical transparency.
Precisely. Unlike Satoshi, who pursued radical opacity, Alberto sought radical transparency. He openly discusses his struggles with PTSD, depression, and being gay in Uruguay. This honesty serves 2 critical functions. First, it's a therapeutic outlet, releasing the pressure of silence. And second, it's a necessary tool to build community trust and counter the negative stereotypes often applied to the cybersecurity field.
A field that often distrusts vulnerability.
Right.
And that radical transparency is directly linked to the community and spaces he created online.
Yes. This is crucial. Hill created his cybersecurity community and the associated spaces explicitly to be a safe place, a structured environment intended to keep his mind busy and actively heal from his trauma. He was looking for community support, validation, and a sense of constructive purpose. He was seeking peace in the algorithm.
But this fragile safe space, built on intense personal vulnerability and a history of profound betrayal, became the target of sustained digital abuse, culminating in the final devastating conflict with the user referred to only as T. This is the hell he endured.
And this is a textbook, brutal case of digital predation, which is far more insidious than simple trolling. We are talking about the calculated use of online dark psychology, the deliberate, manipulative tactics used to exert power and control over the creator of the space.
So what are the drivers for this kind of calculated malice? It seems so counterproductive to the community itself.
Well, the primary driver, according to research on this phenomenon, is a raw, intense need for power and control, often amplified exponentially by the perceived anonymity of the digital environment. These perpetrators frequently exhibit high malignancy traits, categorized often as the dark tetrad.
The dark tetrad.
Narcissism, Machiavellianism, psychopathy, and sadism. The internet doesn't create the malice, but it enables the dark tetrad to practice their destructive methods with high efficiency and low consequence.
So let's detail the specific mechanism of the hell T inflicted, because this systematically dismantled the very purpose of the community Alberto built for healing. T's attacks were not random.
No, they began with consistent, systematic disruption designed to undermine Alberto's authority and sanity. T habitually interrupted, took over the spaces, and made disruptive, annoying noises. Alberto called him the most annoying, disturbing person on Earth.
But the sources suggest that timing and methodology were calculated, not just random rudeness.
Exactly. The source notes that T would later suddenly change his behavior, becoming temporarily compliant or silent only to resume the attacks. This signals deliberate malice, not just incompetence or a lack of social awareness. The goal was to destabilize the host, making him anxious about when the next attack would come.
And this rapidly escalated into intensely personal attacks, weaponizing the very transparency Alberto used for healing.
This is the cruelest part. T repeatedly questioned Alberto's sexuality, using phrases like, "Alberto, why are you so gay?" and even inserted those phrases into the space titles. Alberto notes the devastating public consequence of this targeted repetition.
That Grok AI, the system that scrapes and summarizes the content, began associating his professional identity publicly with that highly specific, weaponized phrasing.
Yes, T was exploiting the platform's algorithms. By flooding the metadata with this targeted, demeaning language, T turned Alberto's source of vulnerability and connection, his honesty about who he is, against him in the most public, searchable way possible. It was a digital assault on his identity and reputation.
Then we have the final, devastating incident that caused a trusted speaker to leave, which Alberto terms the blank speaker insult.
This was a direct, calculated attack on Alberto's ability to host and communicate professionally. An international speaker, attempting to participate, apologized for struggling to understand Alberto's English. T immediately seized the opportunity, explicitly insulting Alberto's command of the language, calling it a piece of shit and sounding like a blank speaker.
And the outcome was immediate.
The international speaker left the space, likely feeling implicated in the toxicity. T successfully humiliated the host, demonstrated a complete lack of respect for the community's stated purpose, and actively damaged the reputation of the space, all in one targeted blow. This incident broke the core protocol of respect and safety the community was built on.
And the emotional weight of this is compounded by what Alberto felt was a profound community betrayal.
Absolutely. He felt betrayed because people who knew his struggles, who knew his history of PTSD, and who were aware that he needed this safe space for his mental health, never stood up. They were witnesses to the abuse, but remained silent, which he interpreted as allowing that to happen.
That silence must have echoed his earlier institutional betrayal by the justice system.
Exactly. The community he created to save him had, through inaction, failed him too.
And adding to this sense of failure was the possessiveness he felt from other individuals in the community.
That's a key piece of the psychological puzzle. Alberto felt that some members were becoming pathologically possessive and controlling over his thoughts and emotions, intensifying the sense that the community he created was now consuming him. Instead of being a safe space, it became a network of psychological dependencies and systemic betrayal. The system, once again, was malfunctioning and collapsing around him.
This systematic abuse led directly to Alberto's acute distress, where he described himself as being about to freak out and enter into a panic attack. This is not abstract emotional distress. This is a severe physiological response to digital trauma.
It underscores that digital conflict is not merely annoyance, it's a threat to physical and mental well-being. This level of acute anxiety demonstrates that the toxic environment was actively triggering his PTSD and pushing him toward a complete nervous system failure. He was fighting for his mental survival in that moment.
In this intense emotional landscape, the sources highlight the crucial role of emotional anchors. A user named Skykiss provided vital stability.
Skykiss, along with others like Helen and Billy Bill, provided what Alberto called a master key to being calm. This presence acted as an immediate emotional regulator, a trusted protocol that hadn't failed. It provided the grounding force necessary for him to regulate his emotions and step back from the edge of a panic attack. It's a powerful illustration of the life-saving potential of genuine human connection, even online, when contrasted with toxicity.
And this intense need for support is reflected in the testimony of one of those friends, Bill.
Bill's testimony provides shared context and vulnerability. Bill detailed his own severe chronic health issues, specifically a hiatal hernia since 2021, and the feeling of medical neglect and systemic failure he experienced in the real world. This shared theme of vulnerability and lack of systemic support in the physical world strengthens the bond between them.
But Bill also demonstrated profound emotional resilience, which served as a model for Alberto.
Absolutely. Bill chose defiance and joy despite his suffering. He articulated his philosophy, "I'm going to leave this world joyous." That's a powerful statement of choosing agency and finding a way forward, even when the body or the system is failing you. This defiance helped frame Alberto's own decision-making process.
This shared struggle, coupled with the ongoing harassment, led Alberto to a painful realization about his community creation.
He had to admit that his cybersecurity community, created with positive intentions for healing and support, had become a toxic thing he was no longer proud of. The original intent had been corrupted by the persistent gas-trolling mental ability of malicious users.
Let's expand on that specific terminology.
Yeah.
Gas-trolling mental ability. It sounds like a blend of psychological abuse and technical jargon.
It is. In blockchain terminology, gas is the fee required to execute a transaction. It represents the computational resources used. Gas trolling in a social context is the deliberate act of consuming the emotional, temporal, and mental resources of the victim wasting their gas to cause maximum disruption and anxiety. T was essentially forcing Alberto to pay a massive psychological fee just to exist in his own space.
And this realization pushed him toward a radical solution, the emotional hard fork.
The desire for an emotional hard fork is a profound metaphor. It mirrors the concept of an irreversible split in a blockchain network. A complete, definitive break from the protocol history that is contaminated. He felt the only way to escape the toxicity and regain his mental health was to hand over the community, which has 10,000 members, to a trusted person. He needs a clean, permanent separation from the network that has become malicious.
This decision reveals a deep-seated, recurring psychological wound. Hill noted that all his decisions intended to do something positive, reporting the vulnerability, creating the safe space, ended up being the worst thing, leading to imprisonment or community destruction.
He fears repeating the pattern of self-sabotage by staying. For a man trying desperately to regain control after profound trauma, the inability to control the toxic environment he created is terrifying. He recognizes that his involvement is now the liability, and abandonment is the only safe operational choice left for his mental health.
The crucial advice he received from his trusted friends like Bill and Helen emphasized the need for grounding outside the network entirely.
Yes, the focus shifted from solving the online toxicity, which is often unsolvable, to mitigating its effects through real-life connection. Finding a therapist, community groups, or structured social interaction outside the digital realm was seen as the necessary antidote to counteract the profound anxiety caused by these abusive online characters. The final, stable protocol must be found in human support outside the toxic network.
This deep dive has spanned an incredible range, from the fictional high-concept cryptography of love and OPSEC to the very real, raw psychological scars of digital abuse and institutional betrayal.
When we look at both stories, the Satoshi myth and the Alberto reality, the core theme is the absolute necessity and the catastrophic failure of trust protocols. In the Satoshi myth, trust was built accidentally, overriding meticulous logic and control. He was searching for OPSEC against centralized threats.
But in Alberto's reality, trust, offered through radical transparency and vulnerability, was brutally exploited by a decentralized community of malicious users. He was searching for safety through distributed trust, and that system imploded.
It brings us back to that cryptographic challenge Satoshi was concerned with, the Byzantine generals problem. How do you achieve consensus among distrusted parties? The problem isn't just in code, it plays out in human relationships. When protocols fail, whether they are communication protocols, community respect, or institutional protections, the entire system, the individual's well-being, collapses.
The ultimate tragic irony is clear. Alberto Daniel Hill was first punished by the centralized system, the state, for being responsible and transparent, landing him in prison. And then he was punished by his own decentralized community, the network, for being vulnerable and open, leading to immense psychological distress.
He tried every avenue, from technical responsibility to radical emotional honesty, to build a safe structure. And every structure ultimately failed because of malice and the breakdown of consensus.
So what is the true measurable cost of radical transparency and intellectual generosity in the digital age? How do we build resilient communities when the core psychological drivers of those who attack them are malice and a relentless need for power and control? That is the profound, unsettling question we must carry with us long after this deep dive concludes.